30 years of PlayStation. Wow, I'm older than the PlayStation itself. I wanted to talk about my history with Sony's PlayStation, since it is an important part of why I play video games. I will be going over the years of each console, as well as some of the games that came out. If I refer to a date that might not make sense to you, just know that I'm referring to the UK release date because I'm British. A little different from my usual video, so we'll see how we go, but it should be fun. 29th of September 1995 was the release of the first PlayStation console in the UK, but it had already released earlier in North America, and in Japan, December 1994. I'm an 90s kid. It was my 7th birthday, I specifically remember, and my parents would basically surprise me with a brand new system, the PlayStation 1. Now at the time I didn't really know much about PlayStation, but I was just happy I was getting something new, because all I had at the time for a couple of years was just the Sega Mega Drive. As much as I loved that system, I didn't have too many games for it, and it was already at the point where the PlayStation had already been out for a little bit, so I was just glad to be playing something a bit more modern, something new. Now I remember specifically, they bought me a bundle, you know, where you get like a bunch of games with your system, and there had already been obviously some games that had come out. And I specifically remember these 7 games that I had. Free Lions, which was a football game on the PlayStation 1. I didn't care about football in real life, so I didn't care about the video game football either. Tomb Raider 2, not Tomb Raider 1, Tomb Raider 2 was my first experience to Lara Croft, and I remember not having the best experience. Dynasty Warriors. A lot of people don't know that Dynasty Warriors was a fighting game, like Tekken or Street Fighter, but they completely changed obviously in the other games. But yeah, like I had the original Dynasty Warriors before it became like these Muso games, you know, where you're fighting like armies of people with just one character or whatever. It was a fighting game. Crazy, right? Cannot forget Ridge Racer Type 4. Mostly because of the music, to be honest. Maybe not a cars guy, but the music, man. The music was so good. The OddWorld games. Dude, these scared me as a kid. That's all I can say. I remember them, for better or worse. I remember them. And I believe the last game, I don't think I've missed any, was Crash Bandicoot, the original Crash Bandicoot. Why not I go over these games by release and yeah, just go from there. I think for me, when it comes to video game boot up screens, it's definitely got to be the PlayStation 1. It's the one I have the most nostalgic for. From the transition to the sound, oh, it's so good. So Crash Bandicoot's up first. Well, I do have a lot to say. This is a franchise that is close to my heart. I have the most memories of it out of the 7 games that came with my system. The first time I saw Crash, I was like, this gives me like a sort of Looney Tunes, Tom and Jerry vibe. You know, very, very cartoony vibe, obviously is what they were going for. It was very goofy. Felt like, you know, a sort of child to maybe early teens type of game with a lot of humor. You know, like it was just trying to have fun with its goofy characters. You know, it was a mad scientist experimenting on animals, and one of them was Crash Bandicoot, and you play as him, and you gotta save your hot girlfriend who doesn't look like Jessica Rabbit, or at least she did to me anyway back in the day. But this was the first time I played anything in 3D. This is the first time I played a 3D platformer, and it was Crash Bandicoot. You know, we're in the era of 3D now. Nintendo is out there with their Mario 64. Sony's out here with, you know, Crash, Metal Gear Solid, Tomb Raider, Resident Evil, you name it. the transition was happening. 2D was still there, and there was definitely still some 2D entries and such, and sprite works and whatnot, but clearly we had jumped from that era trying to transition into 3D. Everyone was jumping on the 3D train. You know, to have my first experience with Crash Bandicoot, I felt quite lucky, to be honest. Crash Bandicoot, the first game, isn't like my favorite of the series. I do think it's probably the weakest out of the 3 classic games, but it didn't deter me. Like, the game is so charming to me. For the PlayStation 1, was a pretty looking PS1 game, considering, very colourful and whatnot, that I was just looking forward to playing the sequels, which was obviously Crash Bandicoot 2 and Crash Bandicoot 3 Warped. And Crash Bandicoot Warped ended up being my favourite Crash Bandicoot game, and it is till this day. So Crash Bandicoot is a hard game, and there was a lot of difficult games on the PlayStation 1. And I think it was just an error. This is the same thing with like Sega Mega Drive, where I think video game devs were just trying to find a way to extend these games, and it was the way of making these games hard, like say Rayman on the PlayStation 1 was a really hard game, and I think it was just their way of, again, trying to increase playability, you know, make the game last longer. But some of these games were just too difficult, and because they were too difficult for 7 or 8 year old me, I would use cheats. And in the case with Crash Bandicoot, there was the like super cheat or super password system, which basically acted like if you didn't have a memory card at the time, because again, memory cards were still kind of becoming a thing, right? So you could actually save your data. And if you couldn't save your data, you had to use passwords to, you know, get back to the level and such. And with Crash Bandicoot, you would have like the super password, which would like unlock all the stages, which is basically like a 100% save file, but it's in a password system. And I would do that just because I wanted to see the other levels. I couldn't get past the first island, man. Yeah, this didn't really stop me from doing this like over and over. I did this for a lot of games, but then I got really curious. I thought, you know, cheats are quite fun. You can have like infinite lives. You can have the notorious big head small mode or whatever, you know, all sorts of fun little cheats and stuff that you could do. Sometimes they would break the game. One of my most favorite cheats on a PS1 game, mostly because I just think it's really silly. Basically, there's a game called Dragon Ball Z Ultimate Battle 22, and technically there's 27 characters, not 22 characters. But how do you unlock the other 5 characters? Well, you have to use like a cheat code. You have to input a cheat code using the PlayStation 1 controller. But the thing is, they just give it to you. It's in the instructions manual. It's not like a secret. It's not like, oh, you know, it's a secret. It's like, no, here's the code. And it's just like, wait, why don't you just have these characters already then, if you're just going to give us the cheat code in the back of the instructions manual? Or you can just an unnecessary step. And I just always thought it was fun. I was just kind of like, the only thing I would say is that the cheat code was a bit of a pain to put in. Like, it felt like half the time it just wouldn't work. But yeah, I did that a lot, especially with my cousin back in the day. We just kind of faffed about with cheats and whatnot. Even all the way back to like my Sega Mega Drive days with like Sonic 1, up, down, left, right, A, start, level select. I would always do that. Whether I got stuck or not, I just wanted to see what you can do and the fun little quirky cheats that you can make happen playing these games. The OddWorld series, man. Yeah, I have a bit of a different memory of this series. I believe both games sort of came out within a year of each other. I think the first OddWorld was like 1997, and the sequel, Exodus, was 1998. I was never good with sounds. For those of you who don't know, I'm actually autistic. Back when I was a kid, it was really prominent, and I had like really sort of bad issues with certain sounds. Certain sounds would just irritate my ears or would scare me in some sort of ways. And OddWorld was definitely going for that sort of creepy atmospheric. Even though, like, I would argue the character's kind of goofy, and I would argue like it's kind of dark slapstick humor, right? But you know, as a little kid, I was kind of creeped out. Maybe not so much by Abe, but just the whole atmosphere and the story and what they tell you and what you see. And you know, I was just like, what is this? And even just like the sounds and whatnot in the background, I don't know, it just really scared me. And I had a really hard time playing the game. It didn't help as well when I was just like listening to the loading screen and you just hear like like, please hurry up and load. Please hurry up and load. But to be fair, when I was a kid, I was scared of like everything. But it sticks into my mind literally because I couldn't play these games. And even if I did, I couldn't get very far. These games were hard. Another really hard series. It's clearly supposed to be like a trial and error type game. But you have to understand, you know, I'm like 7 or 8 years old and I'm seeing like dead animal, like I'm seeing like skeletal structures of like dead creatures with blood on them, right? I'm seeing like Abe's people being like abused or even killed and whatnot, and you know, like just seeing a lot of like damage being done, but also just kind of scary looking creatures, right? These are just, I guess you can kind of be like these kind of like alien like creatures or whatever, but like, you know, not the norm. Like these characters were designed on purpose. It was clearly going for a certain vibe. Although I wasn't really scared too much about the Madakans, but like some of the other characters and creatures, I definitely was intimidated back in the day. And like everything wants to kill you. Like literally everything outside of your friends for the most part wants to blooming kill you in that game. Like it is like a survive mode, you know. But I never could get very far. I didn't complete it until I was much older. Same with Crash Bandicoot. Because, like I say, one, I was too scared as a child, and also too hard. It was just really too hard. But it will always stick with me. Both games will always stick with me. There were even some like creepy cutscenes where I was like, "What is happening?" Like some characters didn't even have like eyes; they're just like white voids and just stuff like that. I was just like, no. So that's my kind of embarrassing, but not really. That's kind of my history with OddWorld, and I'll always remember it for it. Tomb Raider 2, man. I mean, even back in the day, I didn't know too much about it, but I would often see Lara Croft as like the poster girl of PlayStation, you know? She was like in a way, a mascot at the time, alongside like Crash Bandicoot. You would see her a lot on the magazines, and her render was clearly way better than it was in the game. And I would admit, like, her and Torna from Crash Bandicoot were like my first video game crushes for sure, for reasons. But but in terms of the game, Lara Croft, I think, unless I don't know, I might count Crash Bandicoot, but I feel more Tomb Raider was when I was introduced to a 3D game with tank controls, and I immediately did not like it. I could not control Lara very well. I felt like she was just so slow and sluggish, especially coming off of games like Sonic that are a lot more fast paced. She felt so stiff. You know, you had to like slowly turn her around, and I kept thinking, well, if something's gonna come after me, I don't know how she's gonna quickly get out of the way. I'm just gonna have to shoot and hope I kill it or something. But I could not get it. I just could not get around the controls. I tried and I tried and I tried, and unfortunately it kind of put me off. You know, I remember literally starting the first stage and something killed me. Some animal killed me, a wolf or something, I don't know. It was like the first area, and I think I got to a point where like a boulder was chasing me or something, and I guess I was trying to outrun it, and I just didn't. Needless to say, I gave up pretty quickly, even though I was, you know, I was kind of a big fan of Lara as a character and her design and stuff. Most of my memories is just me messing around in her mansion, because, you know, she's rich, she's a treasure hunter. Like, you know, that was basically your tutorial stage to try and get used to the controls. But I mostly just kind of faffed about while basically putting her butler in the freezer, in the big freezer thing, and he would just occasionally just fart. Yep, just randomly, just I was just like, what? just like just random. But I always trap him in the freezer. That's my memory. That's as far as I got in a Tomb Raider game. And I never been like, outside of like trying Tomb Raider 3 on PC when I was a bit older, I've not gone back to the Tomb Raider series. It's just one of those series the controls, man, I just couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. I think if I could get used to controls, or the controls just felt better, I might actually be able to get a little bit further. But yeah, my memories were just like, that was kind of hot. Shame about the game though. Dynasty Warriors is an interesting thing for me, because it was my first introduction to a fighter game. You know, I didn't have anything Nintendo, so I didn't play like Street Fighter or anything like that. But it was my first fighting game. And when I was like sort of looking at like the intros, like these cinematic cutscenes that we were starting to get in these games now, you know, it was really cool. I'd look at them and I'd be like, these look like really awesome looking characters doing awesome looking moves. And I proceed to just suck really badly. You know, ever since I played Dynasty Warriors, I kept thinking, I guess I'm just bad at fighting games. I don't know, but I had a really, really hard time. The CPU would crush me. It didn't matter what character I played. I tried playing and like doing things, but I couldn't, you know, act like the CPU and do cool things. I just kept looking at the CPU doing cool shit on me, and I'm like, oh, I wish I could do that. You know, oh, this guy looks cool. I want to play as him. He looks like he can do cool stuff. And that's mostly what I did. I saw a character that I thought looked cool, and I would just try and do things. And if that didn't work, I'd try somebody else and see if I could cheat my way, just mashing the button. I was a masher back then. I couldn't, I don't know, I couldn't do cool things, and like the CPU would always destroy me. I think I remember like doing arcade mode, eventually getting to like stage 6 or something. By basically just pure luck. I remember specifically there was one character, like he had like this it's kind of like a staff, but it had like giant, like almost like a weight, but it had like giant like weights, like balls at the end of them, and he'd like swinging them around. I was like, whoa. And I just thought that was cool. So a lot of time I just play as him and just smack the opponents with these giant freaking balls or whatever they were. And then there was this other guy, I think he was like in like bluish purple armor, which I think it looked really cool. I think I remember like there was this guy who had like lightning powers or something. He was doing some crazy lightning stuff, and I was like, dude. I was like, this is so cool, but I'm so bad at the game. And I think that was when, even back then, I just thought to myself, maybe I'm just bad at fighting games. Maybe fighting games, I just can't get my head around them. I don't know. But I was never like the biggest fan of like just doing like the offline stuff. I definitely had more fun when I got the chance to play with friends, to just kind of mess around with friends. Sadly, I never really played too many fighting games after that, because again, I couldn't get my head around a lot of the stuff, and if I couldn't play with friends, I didn't really want to play, you know, offline, because I just didn't think the offline was very good. But I'll always remember Dynasty Warriors very fondly. You know, it's the first fighting game I ever played. And, you know, even though I was bad at it, I still had fun, right? I thought the characters were cool, and the presentation was cool and that. I just I just kind of gave up and was like, yeah, I think I'm just bad. I don't think fighting games are really my thing. As for the football game, Three Lions, I don't really have anything to say. I think I like tried it once, and I just remember the funny looking PS1 faces because, my God, some of the PS1 games and their face models were, God, just look at Malfoy in freaking Harry Potter. Jesus Christ. But I mean, my cousin liked football, and so he offered to take it off my hands. So I actually just gave it to him.
Ridge Racer Type 4.
My God, one of the funkiest tracks I've ever heard in a video game. Ridge Racer Type 4. Yeah, that intro alone, I think, got me kind of hyped, but sadly, I realized that I wasn't the biggest fan of cars and just driving around. I definitely was more into like Mario Kart, like Crash Team Racing was for me because I was on Sony. It was much more fun having that sort of like goofing around and whatnot. But the intro alone was very just sort of, the cinematic and stuff, making it seem like, driving around in cars was like the hypest thing. And that music, it's just like, why has this game got so much, like, like such great funky ass music? God. Hearing like a woman actually like sing in the intro and stuff, I'm like, what is happening? And I specifically remember like I think they call them race queens, like the gal who's like, well, race queen slash like the flag girl, right? And I mean, I played a decent amount of it, but a lot of the time I was just kind of like listening to the music, kind of, just kind of chilling to the music as I was playing through. I never beat like the I guess like you call it the one player mode, which is like the Grand Prix mode. I think I got close. It was just one of those things where I might not have cared much about the car. I just kind of looked, saw something that might have like nice colors on the car and such. But outside of that, I was just here for the music. To be honest, I would just boot it up and I would try my best to get as far as I could. But I was just here for the music. If I'm absolutely honest, that music just freaking sells that game. It's just my God. They like that game does not need such music. I'll always remember Ridge Racer for that. Specifically Type 4. There are obviously other Ridge Racer games, but I will always remember that game for its incredible funky music. It was so good. The PlayStation 1 will forever be my favorite video game console. I have just, a lot of memories of the growing up. There's so many great games that I fell in love with. And the library is huge, like really big. There's still so many games that I haven't played that I want to play. Legit, I do want to play. This console is home to some of the most iconic games, like the most beloved games, like Resident Evil, Metal Gear, Final Fantasy VII. There are so many games that to this day that fans, still want to go back and play and do play. And some of these are getting remasters or full-blown remakes. I think that kind of says it all, right? That these franchises were incredible back then. They are still incredible. I still go back to PS1 games to this day. It's a real shame that it just kind of feels like these days in gaming, at least when it comes to Sony, you don't see as that much variety, that much diversity within the type of games that you would see. Sadly, it's just all about that corporate greed now. It's all about like what's trending. You don't really see these quirky games as much anymore. The year 2000, the Sony PlayStation 2 was released worldwide. Sony's next big console, until this day, their most successful console. The PlayStation 2 was the most sold console of all time, until recently when Nintendo Switch may have dethroned it. But why was it so successful? I think the main reason why the PlayStation 2 did so well was literally one thing. Something that nobody else was doing at the time that Sony decided to do. Sell a DVD player. At the time, DVD players were all the rage. Everybody wanted to, get DVDs, watch their films and such on the TV. But it was actually just financially cheaper to just get a PlayStation 2 than an actual DVD player. So not only do you have like the latest games, right? The latest system to play all the latest games at the time, you literally have a DVD player for all your films. That's probably the best decision that Sony has ever made, ever. When I bought a PS2, my parents got it for me. I actually don't know what games I got for it. I'm not even really sure. I might have even just got the console and got the games later. But what I do remember is I specifically went round one of my cousin's houses and he had a PS2. And one of the games he had was Crash Bandicoot. And I didn't know at the time that there was a new Crash Bandicoot game. Especially coming off of Crash Bash, which wasn't great and not really what I wanted. It was good to see that we were getting another platformer game. But it wasn't nearly as good as the classics. And sadly, it just kind of continued. And it continued with Spyro as well. After realizing later on that Naughty Dog wasn't making Crash Bandicoot games anymore, the rights were being passed around. And it's the same with Insomniac and Spyro. They were moving on to Ratchet and Clank, which was kind of, initially kind of like Spyro, but then kind of went its own direction. And Naughty Dog were doing a different platformer, Jak and Daxter, but then would eventually move on to the games like Uncharted and obviously the most successful Last of Us that you keep hearing all the time. It's going to be The Last of Us remastered remake at some point. So sadly, even though these franchises were unfortunately not doing so well in the PS2 era, I was able to experience other series that debuted on the PS2, such as the Sly Cooper series. And I absolutely adore the Sly Cooper series. I love the comic book like style. Again, another sort of very animal cartoony type of show where you play as a literal thief stealthing around doing fun platforming. These characters are amazing. I love their dialogue. It's such a great franchise. I'm so glad I was able to experience it because, the Sly games again is another sort of fantastic 3D series by Sucker Punch, which nowadays are known for like Ghost of Tsushima. And we're going to be getting the new game at the time of recording at some point. Ghost of Yotei, I think it was, which is like the, kind of a sequel to Ghost of Tsushima. But I will always remember Sly. I always go back to it. Absolutely charming and just downright fun series. And maybe one day it will come back, maybe it won't. I don't know. We'll just have to see. So I've got a brand spanking new gaming system, but I need video games. But what video games? In comes demo discs. Now, I definitely played a lot more demo discs on the PlayStation 1, and I'll always remember the quirky music that always played. But I also managed to try out some PlayStation 2 back in the day, although sometimes I would get a magazine with a demo disc and it would just be like trailers for the game, and I'm like, oh, well, I just want to play the game. I just want to play the game. But it was thanks to demo discs that introduced me to all sorts of different series and whatnot. It's actually how I was introduced to like Spyro 3, Spyro 2, like Crash Bandicoot Warped, and even like shooters like Quake and stuff, and then realized that I don't like shooters. I even played a demo for like Tekken 4, and I remember enjoying it, even though again I wasn't like super doing amazing, but I remember enjoying it for what it was. So it's really like thanks to demo discs that opened my eyes to just the variety of games on the PlayStation 2 as well as the PlayStation 1. The PlayStation 2 library is really, really large. And if I wasn't playing demo discs, I was going to my local Blockbusters. Man, I miss that. Going to your local, like, you know, film / gaming rental store and just like renting a game for like £3 or whatever for a few days. I would do that a lot, especially during the era of when I was watching Dragon Ball Z. There was a lot of Dragon Ball Z games on the PS2 era system. I think there might have been also in GameCube. You know, like Budokai, Tenkaichi, and all that. And I remember one time I was actually just looking to see if there was any more when I was at Blockbusters. But there was another game called Dragon Quest. Knew nothing about it. I had a look at the back and I was like, whoa, this game looks really, 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 really pretty. To this day, I still think Dragon Quest VIII is one of the most beautiful looking PlayStation 2 games, at least that I've experienced. And I looked at it and I was like, oh, it's almost like it's almost like an anime. It looks almost like Dragon Ball, because the characters were designed by Akira Toriyama. Rest in peace, legend. Rest in peace. So I took a chance. I was like, this looks cool, you know, like I'm going on an adventure. This is me coming off of trying to play other Final Fantasy games, and I like trying them out and then putting them down and not getting very far. I tried Dragon Quest VIII specifically, although it wasn't called 8 in this country. It was only called Dragon Quest Journey of the Cursed King, because we never had a Dragon Quest game since the 8th one. Yep, crazy. Literally our first experience in the UK was the 8th in the series. And I guess you could say we were kind of spoiled, because what a game. That game alone sold me on Dragon Quest. It is definitely whiplash going from this, you know, big old 3D adventure to the, you know, top-down sort of sprite work of, say, like Dragon Quest 7 and before in that. Definitely a different feeling, but my God, I fell in love with Dragon Quest 8. You know, shout outs to the waifu Jessica, and shout outs to the best character, probably the best character just in general, is Yangus. Freaking love Yangus. I love the characters. I love the way the game looks. The orchestral soundtrack is beautiful. I enjoyed the turn-based, you know, the combat, the you know, the spells and skills that you would use, and, you know, different weaponry and whatnot. I just had fun, really, most of the time. I didn't even mind grinding. Like, I was grinding in that game, but I actually didn't mind grinding. Whereas, I feel like in Final Fantasy at the time, when I had to grind, I wasn't like the biggest fan. But like, I don't know what it was about Dragon Quest VIII, but I didn't actually mind grinding all too much. Like, I didn't really get bored or anything. I actually kind of felt it kind of cathartic. So it's thanks to Blockbusters that I took a chance. I saw Dragon Quest, I tried it, and I never looked back. I have been a fan ever since. I'll always love it. But that wasn't the only one. Like, there are other games that I rented out, like the Onimusha series and whatnot. But I really do miss rental places, man, because especially when you didn't have much money, like, it was so good you could just try a game out and then, you know, buy it later if you really wanted to. The PlayStation 2's library was massive, even more so than the PlayStation 1. Companies were jumping at the chance to get their games on the system. I just want to talk about how large the PlayStation 2 library is. There was so many games for the system. Like, the companies were all jumping on the PS2 bandwagon. And, you know, there was one thing I actually have not mentioned, and that is, of course, the backwards compatibility of the system. Not even the DVD player. The fact that you could literally play your PlayStation 1 games means that not only can you play PS2 and have that entire library, you now got the entire library of the PlayStation 1 on top of it. Absolutely insane. One of my fondest memories of my PlayStation 2 was basically getting a free game from my neighbor. He spoke to me because he initially bought the game for his son, but his mother was like, it was a 12 plus, and I guess he was underage, and it was showing like there was like lots of like sort of action going on, lots of fighting going on, and I guess she just didn't approve. So he was like, do you want it? And I was like, sure. Didn't know anything about this game. And that game would change everything. I'm talking Prince of Persia, The Sands of Time. Now, I only knew about Ubisoft through Rayman, so I was already in positive spirits because I thought, well, I really love Rayman. I really love Rayman 2. Rayman 2 is one of like the best 3D platformers of all time, in my opinion. And so I was mostly looking for like the next Rayman game, which would be Rayman 3. But to find out that Ubisoft was making a different game, I was definitely curious. And this was just another game that just sold me instantly. Like, I played this game and I was like, this presentation, the story, the cinematics, the characters, the gameplay, the music. This game was just like a joy from start to finish. Like before we had the Assassin's Creed, this is what we had, which was an incredible 3D adventure experience. We have a cool character. He's just kind of the prince. He doesn't really have a name in a sort of a very sort of dark setting, in the sense that everyone gets turns into sand zombies, but like you have this cool acrobatic abilities. You can run along walls or run up walls and do like wall jumps and climb all the way up to the top and backflips and shimmying on tiny little ledges. And then you've also got like you literally doing your acrobatic moves on top of enemies, like literally running over them and slashing them about, on top of getting like literal time powers where you can literally rewind time, slow down time, and do all sorts of fun stuff. Like, this game was great. Like, I absolutely loved the journey, and I loved the story, and I like that the prince is like the narrator. Like, he's literally telling you like what happened. Like we're basically all in a way playing an entire flashback where it's like, yeah, so let me tell you about this story. The voice acting is actually pretty damn good, I would say, in this game. I hope that where Ubisoft will eventually revamp that remake that we saw of Sands of Time. But I've still got the classic game, and all I can really say is best free game I ever got. Sands of Time is just incredible game. I go back to it often. I absolutely love that game. I just think Ubisoft overall just kind of nailed it. The PlayStation 2 era was definitely a time where video games were getting kind of like darker and edgier and gritty, right? Even like Jak and Daxter and Ratchet and Clank were doing it at some point. Spyro was doing it at some point. Sonic, Shadow the Hedgehog, right? But, I think of games that influence that, like God of War, right? Devil May Cry. And my personal favorite, the Onimusha series, which is like Resident Evil, but not with samurais. Definitely got me into the whole like hack and slash. You'd think it'd be God of War, but I would say it was actually Onimusha. I absolutely love that series, and at the time of this recording, we're getting a new game in 2026. It's only been like, I don't know how many years, but what a series. Absolutely love that series. Super fun. But I do remember playing God of War, the original God of War, on a demo, and I remember just like thinking of the scale and all the blood and whatnot, but when I got to like the Hydra, I was like, whoa! I was like, this thing is huge. You know, like we're in a generation now where games can pull this off. You know, you look at Shadow of the Colossus, and you know, one of the things that people liked about Shadow of the Colossus was just the fact that they were able to get away with something like that. Like on a technical scale, it's very impressive. We have this, you know, these giant colossi or whatever, like. And you look at it and you're just like, wow, like you can do this on the PlayStation 2. They made it happen, right? Like, and the whole, you know, idea of obviously climbing on these giant monuments back. It's like climbing on Godzilla. It's like, whoa, what is happening? What are we doing here? It's just crazy how much technology changed, I believe, between the PlayStation 1 and the PlayStation 2. And as I say, like, we tend to just go back to a lot of these games for reasons, and for me personally, I don't really go back too often to like PS3 games or PS4 games, not too often, but PlayStation 1 and PlayStation 2 all the time. That should tell you something. The PlayStation 3 came out in 2007 in the UK, but it was actually already out in Japan and in America since late 2006. Coming off the success of the PS2, naturally people had high expectations. The PlayStation 3, I feel like, is where most people probably say they lost the console. God, imagine. Can you remember that? At the time, we had Xbox 360 as like the competition because Nintendo was doing their own thing with like the Nintendo Wii, and it clearly wasn't keeping up with them hardware-wise. But I've never owned an Xbox, but all I would hear, and even to this day, was that the Xbox 360 is just a better PlayStation 3. You know, the PlayStation 3 had issues, loading times and frame rates, and I always hear people say that a lot of these games that aren't even exclusive to PlayStation 3, you can just play on the Xbox 360 and they'll just overall perform way better, maybe even look a little bit better on the Xbox 360. Sadly, I think this is where I started to fall off of Sony. The PS3 just wasn't doing it for me. I wasn't really seeing games that personally really interested me and enticed me. It really felt like this was even more so where companies were trying to cater to what was quote unquote working, right? Like what was people mostly interested in, what was kind of, you know, trending. It kind of felt like it was, you know, we're moving away from the era of the like the dark, gritty games. Like we're past that now, and that includes the era of platformers. You hardly saw any platformers. You know, you had like say like the Little Big Planet games, but that was kind of really it, at least in terms of like the big stuff. It really felt like a lot of those quirky, like a lot of those, like, you know, just variety of different games was starting to become less and less and less. You know, we're leaving that behind in the past, and it was more so like we need to do this now because that's just what I guess the majority of people are interested in, right? So we need to do this, we need to do this, we need to do that. Which again, unfortunately, because I knew what I liked, I was sad as a PlayStation fan that they were going away from these games, because what was coming out, I, for the most part, weren't really interested in. That's not to say there wasn't anything completely, but it was also even more so that less games were becoming exclusive. As I said before, if it was on PlayStation 3, it was probably on Xbox 360, and most people would just say play it on Xbox 360 if you have one because it's just better. But there was one game that I don't think was exclusive to the PlayStation 3, but it was the one I had. And it's one of the most fond memories I do actually have of the system, because I don't actually have that many PlayStation 3 games. And that game is the Batman Arkham series. Now, I'd never played a Batman game up to this point, and my only knowledge of Batman was through like some of the cartoons I would watch, because I never had comics, so I was never like, you know, I never got to read any like superhero comics or anything like that. It was just really TV and video games. But I was really curious because, you know, I remember liking Batman, or at least in terms of like watching the shows. So I was really curious about this series. And by far, I mean, this is the best Batman series that we've ever gotten. You know, I sort of joke a little bit, but I say that Insomniac's Spider-Man only exists because the Batman Arkham series exists, because the gameplay is very, 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 very similar. Like, I'd be surprised if it's not inspired by Rocksteady's Batman Arkham series. I'd be less. It would be like someone telling me that Stellar Blade is not just Nier, and it absolutely isn't just inspired by Nier, and that they just want to make their own Nier game. Nope. It's almost like Bayonetta is like Devil May Cry, but it's not Devil May Cry. I love Bayonetta, by the way. That's another highlight for the PlayStation 3 era. I just think that they captured the Batman atmosphere, the dark, gloomy night sky that Batman would just, you know, always be gliding around in, perching on gargoyles and taking out foes. And I actually just really like the first game that's set in like the asylum with all the crazies, and like, of course, Joker is like the main dude, but you've got all these other villains and whatnot. Batman has to basically try to stop them, and obviously stop the Joker in his plans and whatnot. You're doing all these Batman things. You feel like Batman. You know, you're leaping from one opponent to the other, doing like very fun combos. You are sneaking up behind opponents in the dark and taking them out silently while dealing with armed thugs and whatnot. You are investigating, right? You are gliding using your cape. You're using your gadgets, you know, your grapnel hooks and your batarangs and everything. It's the closest I feel like to ever like being like Batman. Like, you feel so much like Batman. Like, it feels good to play as Batman in these games. And like I say, I just think like the stories are great. I think they absolutely nail the aesthetic and the characters, and the voice acting, you know, is incredible. Like, shout outs to Mark Hamill and his Joker. I think that, like, a lot of people think of like Luke Skywalker, but for me, I actually think the Joker, personally, right? It's just one of his performances, and oh man, shout outs to Kevin Conroy. His Batman will always be legendary. That's another one. That's another one gone. Like, Jesus, what a real shame. But I'll always remember him. I just absolutely adore Arkham Asylum. I just think it's a fantastic Batman game. City is probably like arguably the best out of the series. But I just, something about Arkham Asylum's more linear take on things that I just kind of really like. The city's a little bit more open world, so you actually get to like glide a lot more and whatnot. You feel a bit more, I guess, free, as it were. But the series in general is fantastic. And if I had to take a highlight off the PS3 era, although again, I'm pretty sure it was on Xbox, it would definitely be, for me, it would probably be the Batman series. For sure, would definitely be my personal highlight. And as I said before, like, Bayonetta, I mean, it's Bayonetta. I can't complain. Except for those damn quick time events in that game. Apart from that, she's perfect though. It's late 2013. And the Sony PlayStation 4 has been released. The PS3, we started to get ports of games, PS3 masters of PS2 games. The Sony PlayStation 4 was the age of remakes. You had Crash Bandicoot coming back by a remake from a completely different team, but it was absolutely faithful to the originals. It just, with modern graphics, and looked incredible. Spyro would eventually follow suit. You know, games like the Resident Evil games were getting remade. Final Fantasy VII. If you know me, you know that, you know, I never truly finished the original. But when I tried the remake demo, I just don't know what it is. I fell in love with that game. And it was probably one of the best purchases, at least modern purchases, like the best 50 quid I ever paid for a video game. Because I've made some mistakes before paying for a game that I thought I was going to enjoy and then I didn't. But that was one I was like, you know what? Probably best 50 quid ever, because yeah, I absolutely love Final Fantasy VII Remake. But what's great about these remakes is, again, it's just kind of like remasters where people who perhaps were never able to experience these games, or just didn't for whatever reason, maybe they just weren't around then, or like me, they couldn't drive with the original, they wanted to see if this remake would change their minds. And it definitely did with me. And I've seen so many fans, at least with, like, say, Final Fantasy VII Remake, where they've said, you know what, I might go back and play the original now, or I might go back and try the original again because I really enjoy the remake. Although they are somewhat different experiences, but it's still just kind of like, again, reviving these classic games to either old fans to get to re-experience, or for, introducing new fans, right? Getting more people into these franchises. And like I say, there are so many games, even now, like, we're still kind of getting games every now and again that are just like remakes or remasters. That, of course, doesn't just mean that there were remakes and remasters, but there are also games that I really liked on the system, either sequels to older games or just completely brand new games in general. Now, I don't believe I got a PlayStation 4 right away. I'm not 100% sure. It could have been financial issues. It could have been I was just waiting for a game to come out. But I do remember going to my very first ever gaming convention, and that was EGX in London, England. And I had heard about a new Batman game coming for the PlayStation 4, and I just had to check it out. Well, there was a booth there, and I went in, and they basically just showed us like a trailer, right? We all got to sit in a little booth, and it was just a trailer advertising the new Arkham game. And my god, I still think graphically it's one of the best looking PlayStation 4 games I've ever gotten. The game looks absolutely beautiful. Say what you think about it now. Like, it might not be like my favorite Arkham games, but I still think it's quite the experience. There's a lot of highs for me, there's some lows, but at the time I was just like, it's a new Arkham game, it looks incredible. Scarecrow's the villain. Ooh, I like the Scarecrow stuff in Arkham Asylum, so I was like, okay, what are they gonna do here, right? Like, ooh. And I remember leaving, and they I got a poster, and I went home thinking, I'm getting a PS4. That I was so excited for the Arkham game that I literally got a PS4. But not only that, I got a special edition PS4 that I still have now, that is designed basically as like it's got like a Batman sort of symbol on him, as like a silvery PlayStation 4. That basically what sold me on the PlayStation 4 right there and then. I think some gaming highlights for me on the PS4, whether they are exclusive or not, I think some of these were, some of them weren't. Of course, what was exclusive was Final Fantasy VII Remake. Again, to me, I still find that game an anomaly to me. It's just like night and day. Like, the original, I just had a hard time with when I was younger, and I never just went back to it. But the remake, I just connected with it. I can't tell you why exactly. It's weird. It's like I have some nostalgia for it, even though I feel like I shouldn't really. It's weird. It's really, really weird. But it done so many things right for me. What an experience, and I can't wait to continue it in part 3. Now that part 2 is out. Obviously, like, I haven't had an Onimusha game in years, but I heard Sucker Punch was making a samurai game, and I was like, ooh, okay. And Ghost of Tsushima, my god, what a pretty game. What an aesthetically pretty game. That's a great game as well, in my opinion. A fantastic game. Really, really, really enjoyed that. It's it's kind of like a mixture, actually. You're kind of a samurai, but you're also kind of a ninja assassin. And it's like, do you want to be more samurai? Do you want to be more ninja? And you have all these different abilities. Are you an honorable samurai, or are you not an honorable samurai, you know. That definitely is just like one of, for me personally, one of the highlights. Like, what a fantastic game. Can't wait for the sequel. Of course, we had other big companies like Santa Monica making a new God of War game since the PS2 games. Dad of War, as people call it. And I personally really like it. Like, I actually, you know, I do like the old games. But I was totally fine with this new take on Kratos. Like, you know, this is like, hey, like, some years have passed. He's moved on from Greece or whatever. Well, kind of moved on. And, like, he's got a new life. He's got a son now. And then you're actually seeing, like, Kratos trying, you know, to, like, guide his son down a better path than he was. Yeah, like, it's just, I think it's really cool that some of these games are finally getting sequels, right? And are sort of being revitalized. Of course, the other big hitter is Insomniac coming with Spider-Man, Marvel's Insomniac Spider-Man. Probably better than the second one, but I really like both. Like, both games are really good. Definitely the best Spider-Man game we've gotten, hands down. If Batman Arkham makes you feel like Batman, then Insomniac Spider-Man makes you feel like Spider-Man. And the story is so good in the first one. It's fantastic. It really feels like, at least for me, the PS4 was slowly starting to get my interest back into Sony again, for sure. And there were definitely more games that were at least appealing to me. And I hadn't even mentioned like a bunch of other stuff. Like, we had like Dragon Quest 11, which is like on everything now, but I think it was more so on the PS4 and whatnot. But there's so many more games, at least for me, that really appealed to me, that brought me back. And again, I felt like, you know, is some of that variety coming back? Is it? Can we see more of these games? Can we see companies do some other stuff, or do we have to rely on indie developers, right? Because that, you know, this is really when it feels like the indie developers start to come in and be like, hey, look, we're going to be doing stuff perhaps that others don't, right? And that's kind of like a kind of a way to experience the type of games that perhaps you do like, that the big companies sadly just weren't doing. But with how things were going, you know, I was pretty positive about Sony. I thought, hey, things could be looking up. Oh, wow. The PlayStation 5 really came out in 2020? Dude, I actually kind of forgot about that. I didn't forget about the year 2020. And I don't think many people will anytime soon. But, man, it really came out that year. If you know, you know. It's funny, really, because there really hasn't been that many PS5 games. Definitely not exclusives. And a lot of exclusives aren't even exclusive for very long. But, like, they essentially released a console, and it felt like there was just, like, no games. Or, like maybe one, maybe two at most. And so, there really wasn't a reason. Even now, there's not really feel like that much reason to have a PlayStation 5. Especially not a Pro. Again, unless you're just like really rich, or you're just like a, you know, a PlayStation junkie or something. You're like, I'm gonna get it no matter what. Justifying, you know, even a base PlayStation 5 is just kind of like, well, if there's at least a game that you're interested in, or I don't know, you know, you just get rid of your PS4 and then play backwards compatibility that way. A lot of the games are just like PS4 ports to PS5. There's not really much reason to have one. And I'm saying that who has a PlayStation 5. I would say that, like, it really just depends on your interest, or if you know something is coming to the console and it's going to be on the PS5 first or whatever, then you might want to get a jump on that. But other than that, you don't really need to. And the thing is, the reason why the PS5 actually still sold well despite that is because of scalpers, right? I mean, this is the most expensive console we've had from Sony thus far. And sadly, scalpers were eating all that up and then just redistributing it, trying to sell it for like £300 more than it should. So it's like no one could get a hold of a PS5, right? Unless you want to pay way more than you should. And it was really, really, really bad. I think it's a lot easier now, but it was really bad for quite a while. And even like the price was expensive as is anyway. So it's like, again, either you had to find a way to justify the price or justify buying it from a scalper, which I would never recommend doing. You just gotta wait and be patient. Or just wait for something to actually come out on the system that you'd be interested in. And that's pretty much what it was like with me. I literally bought the system because I knew that something was going to be on it. And I didn't even get it right away. But as soon as I knew where this game was going, I was like, yeah, I mean, I'm a console guy. I'm not really a PC guy. I'm going to get it. So the Final Fantasy VII Remake being split into 3 games, I knew it would probably end up on the next system, and yeah, part 2 did. And that, of course, was Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, which at the time of this recording, it actually came out in 2024. And yeah, I mean, I wasn't disappointed. You know, I was going to get it. I was definitely going to play. I was like, yeah, I bought this system for that. I'm not gonna lie. No, it wasn't Ratchet and Clank. Nope, it was Final Fantasy VII, and I still find it weird that I'm saying that again as someone who just never finished the original. I'm just like, why am I so interested now? I just don't get it. What is this series doing to me? You know, I'm a big fan of Crisis Core and I'm a big fan of Zack, but like, yeah, I don't know. The fact that I'm so excited to be at the part of the series or part of the game where now we're actually in like the open world portion of FF7 and it's absolutely phenomenal. It's just like, what a joy. Now, if anybody is wondering, there won't be any spoilers for Rebirth, so don't worry about that. The music in this game is phenomenal. Did you know that this game won Best Music at the Game Awards? And I'm so glad it did. It didn't win anything else. I think the competition was pretty tough. It only won music, but if it was gonna win any award, my god, like, that game has over 400 music tracks. It's insane. You know, one of my favorite musics in the game is actually just a variation of the overworld. When you get into a battle in the overworld, it actually transitioned into like a battle themed version of that area, and it's so good. It's so smooth. It's incredible. I mean, most of the time you can't really fault Final Fantasy music, but my lord, like Rebirth soundtrack, that alone is just incredible. And overall, I was not disappointed with the game. It's not. The worst part about this trilogy is waiting. The worst part is actually being like, I want part 3 now. Probably gonna have to wait at least till 2027. Probably people are thinking it's going to be like the 30th anniversary, which would be in 2027. Who knows? Might even get a teaser reveal this year. I don't know, but my god, I think that's the worst. It's just like, like gaming has changed so much that a lot of these big games from these big companies, a lot of the time you're just kind of waiting a long time because they cost so much more money and they're so much more time consuming that, I mean, play some other games, I suppose, but that's pretty much what the state of things are nowadays, you know? You know, another surprise was actually yet another Final Fantasy game because, you know, I have a very sort of love-hate relationship when it comes to Final Fantasy games. I usually start them and never finish them. You know, I did that with Final Fantasy X. I've done that with Final Fantasy 12, and Crisis Core is the only game I've actually finished up to that point. But I was very curious with Final Fantasy 16. And I honestly, overall, I thought it was pretty good. You know, it's quite the experience. You know, it clearly is a different type of Final Fantasy in the sense that it feels a lot less like an RPG, which is what Final Fantasy is like 9 times out of 10 for. And I know that this game is very controversial, I think, because of that. It's very action-paced. It feels a bit more like they want to like take the Devil May Cry route with this game. But to me, it still feels like it has like the spirit, right, of Final Fantasy. You see a lot of monsters that you recognize in the Final Fantasy worlds. You still got like your Chocobos and your Moogles. And of course the summons, which are the big appeal, which is essentially kaiju battles, you know, like you can become Mithrids and you can fight Phoenix and all these other summons on this super incredible grand scale. And there's a reason why the highlights are these big fights, because it definitely feels like that's where the focus was. But overall, like the presentation, the way the game looks graphically overall is incredible. The only things that for me personally that aren't the best is maybe the side quests, and like the open world's a bit empty, which is unfortunate, but it can be difficult for me sometimes to connect with characters. But I generally really like the main characters, and I think Clive is one of the best MCs, to be honest. I really do, and it's really cool to see him in Tekken 8. But I generally really like him as an MC. And of course, like, he is joined by his trusted companion, Torgal. Now, it's kind of an instant win for me if you have like a dog in the game. Or in this case, it's kind of a wolf, but you get what I'm saying. And like, it's so good. They have such a good relationship. They're really like best friends. They grew up together when they were little. And Torgal is still with him even when Clive is an adult. And it's the only thing I wish is that there was more Torgal. That's kind of it. And you don't really use Torgal. Like, you sort of use him in battle, but you don't really use him much, which is really unfortunate. I guess there's only so much you can do with a wolf dog sort of thing, but yeah, that's actually it. I just wish there was more, but no, like, I was connected to these characters, this story. You know, I really like Clive's other companion and obvious love interest is Jill Warwick. You know, she's another great character. They actually go through very similar things, and these two are kind of childhood friends who grew up with each other. They go through a very sort of tragic thing in the story, but then they end up, you know, things kind of, I guess you sort of say they worked out. I always kind of say this, and some people don't agree with me, but I always say that Final Fantasy 16 has similarities to Final Fantasy 7 if you look into it. And I always say that Clive and Jill are basically Cloud and Tifa if... Cloud and Tifa? Cloud and Tifa. If Cloud and Tifa were less awkward and were a bit more confident. Like, it was obvious that these two clearly want to be a thing, but you know, they're going through stuff. It's a beautiful thing to see. Like, I actually like a Final Fantasy game that isn't Crisis Core, and it's Final Fantasy 16. It's not Final Fantasy 7. It's Final Fantasy 16. Unfortunately, I feel like it kind of gets a bit too much hate. I don't know. It was different, right? That's what it was. It was different, and some people didn't like that, but I actually didn't mind it. I thought overall it was a really, really fun game. I enjoyed the action. I enjoyed the abilities. I enjoyed the icon. That's what they call them, the icons, the summons. I enjoy the big fights and whatnot. And I guess we'll just have to see what happens with the next Final Fantasy. Other memories of the PlayStation 5. To be honest, it's kind of crazy to me how long the PlayStation 5's actually been out, because it feels like we're halfway through its cycle, and I still feel like we need more games. But you know, there are some games, you know, I think I mentioned like Spider-Man 2, like the continuation was really good. Again, I feel like that game unfortunately kind of gets a bit of hate, and compared to the first one, a lot of people just prefer the first one, which is fair enough. Doesn't necessarily make the second one bad, but I don't know, I still enjoyed it. Of course, God of War, or Dad of War, got a continuation, and I actually think I prefer God of War Ragnarok over Dad of War, personally. Yeah, I don't know, I feel like it was God of War, but better, in my opinion. Again, some people don't agree with that, but I don't know. I'd have to go back to God of War perhaps and see, but I really enjoyed it. I do feel like it definitely complements the story of God of War. Like, you have to play these two games. You can't. Well, you could just play God of War Ragnarok, but I feel like it definitely would benefit you more, and you'll feel more connected to the characters and its story. I think if you play both of them, so you definitely need to play both of them. They're both fantastic games. However, I still feel like we're definitely in the era of, we gotta do what's trending. What is trending? You see so many these big one-hitter games that people play online. You know what I'm talking about. There's a lot of them. Or let's jump on the Fortnite train or whatever. There's a lot of them, and it's still going. And you know, if you like those games, that's fine. But unfortunately, I don't, and I'm just kind of tired of seeing the same sort of games over and over, where it's like, come on now. It felt like platformers were coming back, which was a start, and then it kind of felt like they fell off again, and it's like, oh no. It's like not doing well enough for the companies to do it. Like, you know, I can't stop the PlayStation 5 talk without mentioning one of those whimsical games. One of the games that, in my opinion, is like a savior for the console for me. Like, for sure. And it's not Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Oh, no. It's one of those 3D platformers. You know, the ones I absolutely love and adore. The game of the year, 2024. And that is Astro Bot. Platformers, especially I think 3D platformers, are just my comfort zone, man. I know what I like, and I know, like, perhaps I've got to accept that things are just changing. But then you get a game like Astro Bot, and I'm just like, wait, hold on. Is there a hope? You know, can platformers make a return? Can platformers boldly stand next to these AAA games doing other things, you know? Is there hope, and is there room for platformers to flourish? And I think so. I honestly do. I mean, with the success of Astro Bot, I would say so anyway. I think the only crime for Astro Bot is that it is exclusive, and I would argue it is pretty pricey, so there's going to be a bunch of people that want to play it but just can't. But I'm so glad that this game exists, because to me, this, well, represents everything that I do think PlayStation was. I do think it represents the golden era, but like kind of brought in with like a kind of modern light. Like, you know, people always say that as a 3D platformer, it's great, it's fun. If you love that sort of stuff, you're going to enjoy it. And, you know, you could say that Astro Bot doesn't necessarily do anything like revolutionary or anything particularly different. But I think what's important about this is that it feels like it takes a lot of ideas, ironically from Nintendo, as the person said on stage at the Game Awards, without saying it was Nintendo that inspired them. But is that, you know, take a lot of ideas from these platformers, put that all in one game, while also celebrating what makes PlayStation great, celebrating the history of PlayStation, but not just PlayStation and gaming in history. Like, I'm pretty sure there are references to games that weren't necessarily exclusive on PlayStation, but they might have been on PlayStation at some point, just not exclusive. And I think it's done in such a great way. I think what people underestimate in terms of the success of Astro Bot is there's one word, and that's called nostalgia. I'm seeing so many people saying that I'm playing this with my child, my son, right? And that right there is a new audience, a new generation. If kids are getting into Astro Bot, it's no different than me getting into Crash and Spyro back in the day. This could spark interest in platformers. If people really like this, then there's hope, right? There's hope that these sort of games can come back. you know, not everything has to be these like big story adventure games, or here's another Dark Souls, here's like the 100th Dark Souls games, and there's no, like, I'm not saying they're bad games, but I'm just saying, like, you know, there's a lot, and there's even Dark Souls games that aren't even made by the Dark Souls company. So again, it's like everyone's jumping on trends and all this and that, and it just kind of feels like, oh, there's a lot of this and a lot of that, but there's not enough variety. It's just, let's just do these types of games, and that's it. So when you see Astro Bot, it just kind of feels like it really stands out, because it's like, whoa, a free platformer, and it's doing so well in this day and age. Crazy. What I love about Astro Bot, though, is it feels like it gets PlayStation. It gets its history. You know, you see all of these bots that are all designed with like these classic characters, some new characters, like there's modern characters like Horizon, but you see like these classic characters with like old PlayStation 1 games, PS2 games and whatnot, and you see the detail and you know, the way these bots act, and you're like, Team Asobi gets it. You know, they just love PlayStation, and they want to show the world what is great about PlayStation, or was, because you can just look back and see these old characters, and you're like, man, remember when Sony used to do all this stuff? Good times. And then you just go cry in a corner because you're like, man, this game has not gotten a sequel since the PlayStation 1 days, and it's like... But my boy Croc's coming back, which I never thought I would say. My God, Croc is coming back, which is, you know, insane. I think what's also insane was that they basically said that the companies that they approached gave the rights to these characters for nothing. Absolutely nothing. Like, I think that says something. The fact that they just wanted to be like a part of PlayStation's history and celebrate it is, in my opinion, what gaming should be all about. You know, it should be all about, we're celebrating the joys of video games. Unless you're Square Enix. I don't think we're going to get anything Final Fantasy from them anytime soon. Alright, they did add Gex though, and I'm always reminded that Gex is a Square property, but yeah, sorry, no Cloud Strife or Chiefs or whatever, nothing like that. I don't think Clive's going to be in Astro Bot anytime soon. This game was absolutely a joy from start to finish. Again, like, it's a 3D platform, so unless the controls are like really bad, or, you know, the game's convoluted or something, there's a good chance I'm going to at least have a decent go. But to me, like, the music was catchy. The game is aesthetically beautiful. It's gorgeous. It's colorful. It's nostalgic, because, you know, it's obviously a very childlike game. And yeah, it is great to hear new and old fans and older people, younger people saying that, you know, like, this game is great. And as I mentioned earlier, like, the fact that there are parents playing this with their kids, and the parents are feeling nostalgic because they're like, oh, this reminds me back in the day when I used to play this and these franchises, and now I'm getting to sort of relive that in a way with my kid, and my kid gets to see what I used to be in, and they're really into this now. They're really into this, and they're wanting to play more Astro Bot. It's great. It's absolutely amazing, and I can only hope, especially with it winning Game of the Year, that it sends a message that we don't always need these massive games that take forever and cost so much to make. This was created by a small team on a smaller budget, and what they achieved, I think, is something that we really need to recognize, and hopefully decide that maybe there is room for platformers. Maybe it's okay to make smaller games, because not everyone wants to play super long, massive games. Not everyone has the time for it. Some people just want to play something simple and fun, and you do the one thing, you know, you jump, you hover, you press the button to attack, and you just jump around and have fun and mess around with, you know, all the particle effects and everything. Astro Bot just reminded me of why I love 3D platformers, and yeah, obviously, like, the things that I really do like about PlayStation. And as I mentioned before, there are so many games that I want to play. Like, I want to play Freaking Ape Escape now. I've never played it. Maybe I'll stream it. But I definitely, if one thing, Astro Bot will get you to be curious about some of the games that I've never even heard of. There are a bunch of games where I'm like, wait, what is that? That was on the PlayStation 1. I never even heard of this. Now, there's some deep cut references. Also, they put Samanusuke from Onimusha in the game, so I mean, that's automatically a 10 out of 10 for me. Astro Bot really is that game that says, you know what? We get it. Right? We get it. And I just hope that the industry gets it. Sony's golden age will forever be the PlayStation 1 and PlayStation 2. I'm not on board with everything they do, but history shows us that they have given us some great games, incredible games even. Games that I will always go back to. I can only hope going forward that we see more of the old PlayStation, because to me, that is PlayStation. It's why I became a fan. It's why I made this video. If you stuck around till the end, I really appreciate it, and I'd love to hear your memories on PlayStation as well. Remember to have fun when you play games, because that's what it's all about, isn't it?